Hello, everyone. Today, I'm going to analyze a novel whose plot is simply irresistible. In this story, the female protagonist, while searching for her origins, uncovers a series of shocking truths. She learns that she might be a figure from an ancient prophecy, and the people around her, including the male protagonist she loves, may be using her for some purpose. However, at critical moments, the male protagonist shows his deep affection and protective instincts for the heroine, leaving her torn. To make things even more unexpected, the heroine discovers that some of her so-called friends have been deceiving her all along, while those who truly care for her might be the ones she misunderstood before. This contradiction between identity exploitation, coupled with the reversals in friendship and love, forms a highly captivating plot in the story. So follow my analysis to see how the heroine finds her own truth and happiness amidst these difficulties. Chapter 27. The castle trembled with the force of 𝐊𝐢𝐳 rage returned. The thunderous slamming of doors reverberated through the ancient stone walls, and I felt a sharp, visceral stab of fear in my chest. The king's temperament was as volatile as ever, and his fury was palpable even from a distance. My eyes, wide with horror, darted between 𝐿DR and Finn, the two guardians, tasked with my protection in 𝐿𝐢𝐳𝐬's absence, exchanged brief, apprehensive glances before turning their attention back to me. Their usual composure was visibly shaken by the king's explosive entrance. Finn, ever the observant one, muttered under his breath. It would appear the king was not pleased with what he learned. His cautious nature seemed to be warring with his duty to remain calm in the face of danger. 𝐿DR, protective as always, rose to his feet with fluid grace. He extended a hand towards me, his eyes reflecting a mix of concern and amusement despite the tense situation. "Let us leave his wing for a while, my lady. I doubt he would want you to see him in such a state." I hesitated, torn between my desire to stay and confront Tarek about what had transpired and my instinct for self-preservation. The conflict must have shown on my face because just as I was about to protest, the king's enraged roar echoed through the halls, causing the very air to vibrate with his fury. Without further hesitation, I slipped my hand into 𝐿DR's, my obedient nature overriding my curiosity. "Mind your wolf," Finn cautioned as we hastily exited the northwest sitting room, heading for the small staircase at the end of the hall. His words carried a weight of experience and concern. "Be prepared if he suddenly invades your head. We don't want to end up hurting Lady Immerse like 𝐿𝐢𝐳𝐬 did." He flashed me a reassuring smile, but I was too preoccupied to return it as the 𝐿DR ushered me swiftly down the back stairwell. I craned my neck, trying to catch one last glimpse of 𝐊𝐢𝐳𝐬's wing. A worried frown tugged at my lips as questions swirled in my mind. What could have provoked such anger in him? Was he all right? 𝐿DR, sensing my distress, attempted to comfort me. "Don't worry, my lady. Turf is used to dealing with him when he gets all moody like this. He'll calm him down." Despite his ever-present amusement, his words did little to quell the unease churning in my stomach. We had almost made our escape when fate intervened. As we stepped into the main hall, my breath caught in my throat. There, looming before us like a storm made flesh, was Eric. My steps faltered, and I felt the blood drain from my face as I took in the sight before me. He was covered in it. It drenched his shirtless torso, covered the dark of his pants in a black stain, and was even clinging to his mouth and jaw. And it was not his. Was not expecting this. I barely heard 𝐿DR say over my own blood pounding through my ears. What had he done? The king's eyes snapped towards us, to mine, and I flinched backwards at the furious look dancing in his no longer blue gaze. His eyes were black, the entire expanse of them. I gulped nervously and took a small step back. He growled, "Dear Lord, why, you killed them." I knew the answer before the words even slipped past my lips. There was too much blood for it to be anything other than a handful of bodies he must have torn through. I could feel the color drain from my face. Oh my God. My head was beginning to pound, and it felt like no matter how hard I tried to breathe, air refused to reach my lungs. He had killed them. People I had known my whole life, that practically raised me besides 𝐊𝐢 and 𝐿𝐻𝐬. But was it even the elders? Perhaps it was just some random family that got in his way at the wrong time. Rumors from before started flashing through my mind. The king of the north. A great, terrifying being who showed no mercy. Who killed if you looked at him the wrong way, or if you looked at him at all. A man who would dismember you in front of your family just for wandering into his lands. A beast who would kill a village just because they pissed him off. I staggered backwards. My palm pressed to my suddenly throbbing forehead, but the action only seemed to worsen his already explosive anger. He let out a dark growl, and then was in front of me in a flash, his black eyes glaring down at me like two dark, burning coals. Yes, his voice came out as a dark snarl, sharp teeth biting into his bottom lip. This was not the same man who had held me so gently the other morning. I killed them. Every last one of those pathetic underlings that dared call themselves elders. I flinched back from that hard bite in his voice with wide and slightly terrified eyes. All rumors stemmed from something, and this North looked like he couldn't care less whether I was his mate or not. Just another underling who he could easily tear apart. You shouldn't be so surprised, he snarled, the light from the ceiling reflecting wickedly in the black of his eyes. I am a wolf-born mate. Fulfilling monstrous actions is what we do. What we enjoy. Easy North. Immerse. North's black gaze snapped to 𝐼𝐻 doors. His lips pulled back in a life, threatening snarl as he growled at his general. I eased further away from him. This was all too much. You killed them. They didn't do anything. I shouted up at the still furious, blood-soaked Tarek. But that did nothing to calm his rage. They fucked up everything. His voice came out as roar, one so loud it caused my ears to throb in pain. There were tears pricking my eyes, a few falling to my cheeks before I could stop them. My head was pounding, my lungs unbreathing, and I could barely make out anything besides the black dots dancing around my vision. This Eric was terrifying. He was the man of the stories, of the rumors. This was the true king of the north. And of course I blacked out because he simply yelled at me. And I groaned against the pounding behind my skull and blinked my eyes open. The room was dark. The air cold as warm blankets pinned me to the bed. There was no light shining in its bleak expanse. I let out a shaky breath. How did I get here? There was movement at my side, a soft rustling of fabric, before the bed dipped softly beside me. I blinked up into the darkness. Are you okay? North's voice was gentle, caring even, but it took me a moment before I realized the light shining down at me was the glow of his blue eyes. My head hurts, I murmured as I pressed my palm to my throbbing skull. His blue eyes dark and a flicker of memory shot through my mind. Then another, and another until I remembered just what had landed me in such a predicament. I'm sure he heard the hitch in my breath, or noticed how I leaned slightly away from his heavy weight at my side, because he let out a soft sigh. I can't say that I am sorry, because I am not. He started softly, his large hand resting just beside my hip, or at least I thought it was. The only thing I regret is causing you pain. I remained quiet. I had been so terrified of him, horrified at the blood soaking his body, and the black color of his eyes. He looked like a murderous beast, one with little care in the world. He was not the Eric I knew, but one I had heard about from traveling lips. I tried so hard with you. I try so hard to not let you see what is always simpering just beneath my surface. But it is so ridiculously straining. His voice had dropped to a hoarse whisper, one he didn't bother hiding the emotion from. I couldn't see him, but I knew those blue eyes were gleaming down at the ground. This was the most open and vulnerable I had ever seen him. It was just a pity that he had to kill a handful of people for it to happen. I was not always like this, not always so mad all the time. When I still had my family, I was happy. He spoke softly, his voice distant as he recounted long, forgotten memories. But that was so very long ago. and I've been so alone ever since. It is easy to lose control. His words tugged at me, at that lonely part inside of my chest I knew so well. But that didn't make up for what he had done. Some of those elders were kind to me. Images of Elder Lana's gentle voice teaching me and I how to read and write with the other town's children flashed through my mind. Even memories of Elder Cain. Despite how pompous he was, he always managed to keep the village safe with 𝐊𝐿𝐼𝐻. They might have invaded my privacy, experimented on me and my power, but they were still good people, some of them. Or I thought they were. I didn't know what to believe anymore. First, 𝐊𝐿𝐼𝐻 had come storming up the mountain, saying they had lied to me my whole life. And then May had as well. Had even showed me a hidden tomb where they had supposedly kept me locked away for hundreds of years. I didn't know what to believe anymore. I wanted answers, but the ones I were getting seemed too ridiculous to be true. I had to have parents, had to have a legitimate past. I wanted to, more than anything. I didn't want to be some star that had been cast out of the sky, didn't want to be that girl locked away in a glass coffin for centuries. At this point, I wasn't even sure if I wanted North. That was true. I would ask for your forgiveness, if I knew you would give it to me. For the first time since I met him, I wanted him to stop talking, stop trying to make me understand. I was tired, so unbelievably exhausted at the ridiculously all. He should have killed me when I trespassed on his lands all those months ago. Or rejected me at least. He always made up excuses for us not to be together anyways. What difference would it have made? What did they even do? His blue eyes snapped over to mine, and the sad look in them only grew. But he didn't reach out for me. I was thankful, really. I doubted I would have let him. They kept you from me. Immerse. With or without my anger, I would have killed them. I'm sorry that you must know this, but it is true. I am a wolf born, and I don't like it when people take what is mine. What does that even mean? I groaned and pressed my palms into my eyes. No one has kept me from the king, except the king himself. Just more secrets and more lies. It never seemed to end. Stop with all of the secrets, all of the lying. It's becoming ridiculous. I didn't bother trying to stop the hard bite in my town. I didn't want to. I had every right to be upset, and I cared little if that aggravated him. He was quiet for a moment, his blue eyes hard before he let out a dark sigh. I know, but I do what I believe to be for the best. Just give me a little more time. Then I will answer all of your questions, truthfully. His words offered little reprieve. I felt like all I had been giving him was time. Time and patience. And hope. But now he killed an entire town's elders without a blink. Locked my best friend up in some infirmary, and tossed her brother off the mountain. This was just one giant nightmare after another. I am sorry I have caused you such turmoil. He spoke again at my silence, but I refused to look anywhere near him. But I will not apologize for killing them, or for keeping things from you, nor do I have to. He stood slowly to his feet, his blue eyes gazing down at me in a sharp concentration before he turned away. It is late, and you should go back to sleep, he muttered before I heard his footsteps walking to the door in the dark of the room. I could only lay there in a quiet numbness as if none of this were real. How I wished it was. He paused just inside of my door, the dim light of the hall shining through to reveal his no longer bloodied skin and dark attire. I understand if you fear me right now, or if you will never see me in the same light again. But He hesitated and licked his lips. His blue eyes sad as they flickered back to mine. I need you. Immerse. I do not know how I was able to live without you before, but I know I cannot now. His words squeezed painfully at my chest, his soft tone filling my brain with a groggy fog. Why couldn't he just let me hate him? If only for a moment. If you can't sleep, or if some part of you forgives me enough to tolerate me, I will be in my room. He gave me a small smile, and then walked out into the hall, the door closing softly behind him. I wanted to stay viciously mad at him, to hate him at least for a little while, but it was increasingly hard. He has hidden so much from me, kept me locked away in isolation with only 𝐿𝐲𝐻𝐻's presences as a reprieve, and killed those who held significance in my life. And yet, I could not hold on to the hate and anger that I desperately wanted to. I'm not sure if it was because of the mate bound, or simply because I was weak, but I wanted nothing more than to curl into his arms and press myself against him for as long as possible. Arms that had just recently been drenched in the blood of my town's elders. Pathetic and weak. That was what he had made me, but I still did not hate him for it. He was right. He was a wolf born, the king of them all. He has done far worse in the past, and he would probably do far worse in the future. Could I be with a man like that? One who killed those who made him angry simply because he could. Could I love someone as such? It was a stupid question, because no matter how hard I told myself no. It's far too soon. I knew I loved him. I knew I would always love him, but I could easily write that off as the mate bond. Love was such a temperamental word. I loved May, and 𝐊𝐲𝐬𝐵, even 𝐿𝐲𝐻𝐻, and a part of me had even loved the elders, but the odd emotion in my heart for Eric was foreign to me, and it was scary. I didn't want to admit it to myself, to tell my mind what my heart already knew. I could leave the mountain, leave the entire North for that matter, but I could never truly leave him. But part of me, the part that hung on his every word, would stay. This was my life now. I stood just outside his door, all those thoughts stumbling through my mind. Could I so easily forgive him? Was I really going to run back into the hands he had used barely a day before to kill for people? I let out a heavy sigh and shook my head. It honestly didn't matter. I knocked softly on the large wooden door, but heard no reply. He must have been sleeping. It was late anyways. I should have gone back to my own room, but there I was, pushing the door gently open before I could listen to my better judgment. There was a thin beam of moonlight streaming in through his large windows, and I used it to walk slowly over to his large four-poster bed. He was lying heavily on his side, his blue eyes closed as he grimaced in his sleep. The sight made me frown. He looked so gentle, so vulnerable like this. It was hard to believe he was the same man who could kill so mercilessly. And yet, I was still climbing into the bed beside him. The minute my head hit the pillow, his frown eased and his tense shoulders relaxed. My lips pulled into a small smile. My life was just one big, jumbled mess. Chapter 28. The king was still sleeping when I woke up the next morning, his large body resting peacefully beside mine. I blinked over at him, at the soft look resting across his handsome face, and let out a quiet sigh. Why couldn't we be like the regular mates of his kind, the ones he always seemed so proud to tell me about? Because he was a king, the king, and I had no idea what I was anymore. I cast him one last look carefully from the large bed. North didn't move once. I watched his large frame breathe evenly beneath the thick covers as I walked quietly towards the large oak door of his room. My footsteps light as I stepped on the very tips of my toes. I didn't know how I felt about yesterday, but I knew I wouldn't be able to figure it out with those blue eyes glowing down at me. He had killed a handful of people that had practically raised me, and yet I still slept beside him like nothing had happened. What was wrong with me? He had been so different, so unlike the North I had grown used to, the king from the traveling stories. It was rather frightening, but I knew he wouldn't have hurt me. Not physically, at least. But he hurt others, killed others. He was right, though. It shouldn't have surprised me. He was the ruler of his entire, animalistic kind after all. I just needed to be away from him for a while. There was already a bath waiting for me in the side washroom of my own chambers, and I slipped easily into the hot, refreshing water. Oh yes, this was lovely. I leaned back against the marble tub and closed my eyes, the warm water resting just beneath my chin. What a mess my life had fallen into. I needed to find the infirmary and talk to May, if what North said was true, and they were going to fix whatever was wrong with her. Maybe she would make more sense. I hadn't seen 𝐿𝐲𝐻𝐻 since Eric told him to take her away, and it was oddly discontent. I hadn't realized how much I relied on his company. It was long before I was climbing out of the quickly cooling water with a sigh and pulling on a simple tunic and cotton pants. Even though spring was slowly starting to make its appearance. The snow and chill in the air around the kingdom seemed to never disappear. I rather liked it. It was still very early in the morning when I slipped from my rooms, the sky just barely starting to lighten with the morning sun. The halls were relatively empty as I wandered out of the king's wing, and besides a few servants running about, I didn't see anyone, not even the generals. I frowned. I was sure at least one of them would be awake and meandering about. "Excuse me," I asked a passing servant after wandering aimlessly around the large statue-lined halls for what seemed like hours. The server paused, his mousy brown eyes wide in surprise, and what looked like slight fear. His panic made me frown. "Could you tell me where the infirmary is?" I asked softly, a small smile pulling at my lips in some attempt to ease the poor man's nerves. Up the main steps and down the second hall. "My lady," he muttered quickly, bowed, and then hurried away. I ran my fingers through my freshly cleaned hair. Well then, the servants here didn't seem to speak much, if at all, and they were rather jumpy when addressed. Not that I had much experiences with servants anyway. I followed the nervous man's directions until I reached a large wooden door that was nearly as tall as the stone pillars lining the halls. No matter how long I roamed this castle, there always seemed to be a new turn or door. It was maddening, really. I didn't bother knocking. The door seemed too large to pass any sound through. Opening the thick wood was hard, and I had to put most of my weight into pushing against it. But it budged just enough for me to slip through, and I was gazing over at rows upon rows of white-sheeted beds before I knew it. 𝐖𝐨𝐿 was nowhere to be seen. None of the generals were, but I wasn't sure if that was a good thing or not. May was sitting on a plain white bed towards the back of the room, clothed in a pale robe-like gown. Her dark cloak and ragged clothes from the other day were folded neatly on the nightstand beside her. Besides the two of us, the infirmary was completely empty, and her head snapped up as the door closed behind me. I held and helped the small smile that pulled on my lips at hers. "Immerse," she started with a timid sigh, her hazel eyes flickering against the candle light illuminating the room. "I'm glad you're okay. 𝐖𝐨𝐬𝐿 had said you fainted yesterday." 𝐖𝐨𝐿. Well, that was awfully informal for an underling. Yes, I was pretty scared of him at first, but he's actually quite nice. There was a blush rising to her cheeks, the same one I saw what seemed like years ago when she looked at Turf in the lower kingdom. It made me want to laugh and roll my eyes. Looks like she had a thing for wolf-born generals. "Yes, he is. You look like you're feeling better," I admitted softly as I walked around the many beds and cleaning trays of the infirmary. She did actually look a lot better. In just a few days, those dark circles under her eyes and the hollow of her cheeks was already starting to fade. "I am feeling better." There was a bright smile on her face, one that matched the shine in her eyes. The stressed out, horrified May from just the other day seemed to have completely disappeared, but that didn't mean she lost there. I paused just beside her bed, my eyes glancing over every familiar feature of her face before I broke that unwanted bubble surrounding our heads. "May I don't exactly know what happened in the market, and I am so sorry for whatever the elders have done to you, 𝐿𝐴, but I need to know what you were talking about." The light from her eyes quickly faded, and she glanced away as I sat slowly beside her on the edge of the rather hard cot-like bed. "I was deranged when I found you in the town. From all the interrogations and everything, I don't even remember half of what happened. Besides, you're safe here. I highly doubt the king. Please." I was surprised at the desperate plea that fled my lips, and even more so at the weak tremble in it. I was beyond tired of all this begging for answers and receiving none, and living a life of complete and total ignorance. No one here tells me anything, and North is more obsessed with keeping me isolated than helping me understand. If you know something, anything, don't hide it from me. I promise to listen this time. I meant every single word of the kneading beg that fled my tongue. Despite what 𝐊𝐲𝐬𝐷 claimed, North has kept me at arm's length for so long, and has hidden so many things from me. I honestly resented him for that, even if I constantly looked over it. It was easy pushing it down these past couple of months, and I held desperately on to the hope that one day we could be together like what I assumed normal mates were like. But killing the elders was just too much. I was tired of being respectful of his wishes, when he was never of mine. He didn't care how I felt or what I thought, even though he apologized for upsetting me quite often. It was my turn to stop caring about his. But that was a lie. I was no Wolfborn. No Eric. I could never stop worrying about his feelings, or his thoughts, or him, and I didn't know how to feel about the elders. The only way to sort out the mess inside of me was space. A space I initiated this time, at least for a little while. May let out a quiet sigh before her dark eyes flickered up to mine. "Are you sure? And sometimes ignorance is bliss," says the girl who came charging up the mountain and started spewing random accusations about me being locked away in a coffin for hundreds of years. "How did you even do that mind fission thingy?" She looked away uncomfortably again, her hand reaching up to play nervously with the ends of her dark hair. I narrowed my eyes at the action. I had thought I knew everything about May and her family, but like everything else in my life, I was wrong. It's just a trick 𝐊𝐲𝐬𝐷 taught me a long time ago. And the coffin part was true. I've been to the cave. That single sentence made my breath catch in my throat. She had been there. It actually existed. I gulped and wrung my hands together nervously in my lap. It's real. Even if it was, and sure I didn't have anything to worry about. I didn't know what to believe anymore, but I knew that I had memories of my early life. Memories with May and 𝐿𝐸. Yes, I wouldn't have believed it I didn't see it for myself. But you know we shared a childhood together. May, you've seen me when I was young. We grew up together. I didn't mean to sound condescending or anything along those lines, but I hated that I felt like I was reassuring myself more than her. Her bright eyes refused to meet my own, and her pale cheeks seemed almost like glass as she played with the thick hospital blanket resting over her lap. She seemed as if she were trying to hide herself, like she would rather be anywhere else than having this conversation with me. I don't think it was real," she finally admitted a tense moment later. I think they place memories in our heads. Immerse. My ears felt as if they were buzzing, and my body leaned unconsciously away from hers. Fake memories. That can't be true, but it's happened before. Some freak toying around inside of my mind, placing thoughts there so I would claim them as my own. I stood shakily to my feet. It was suddenly too hot in the large, open room, and I could feel my hands shake and grow clammy. My entire childhood was a lie. My whole life. No, it couldn't be. This was all just a dream. Just a horrible, terrible dream I would wake up from eventually. Wake up in that large bed in the room down the hall from North's, with May tucked safe and sound back in their house in the village. The elders would be alive and well, and good. 𝐊𝐸𝐻 would be leading the town and May would be taking dangerous adventures down to the mountain's edge like we had done so many times before. Immerse. She started softly as I paced on the floor beside her bed, my hand running furiously through the dark waves of my hair. This was not a dream. The cave. Can you take me there? I paused suddenly beside her, my breathing leaving my chest in rapid pants as I spewed the question at her. I needed to know it was real. If I did, maybe then the mess inside of my head would make sense. Her hazel eyes widened at the question, and her grip on the blanket tightened. I was going to get answers if it was the last thing I did. If that is what you want, 𝐿𝐸𝐷. It was still early in the morning when May and I decided to leave. Too early for most of the castle to be awake. I wanted to wait a few days to make sure she was well enough, but she insisted she felt fine. The sooner we get this over with, the better, she had muttered when she rolled out of the infirmary bed and stood to her feet. I frowned at the action. I felt bad for asking her to take me to the cave, especially after she trekked up the mountain all by herself barely 2 days before. But she agreed so easily. If she truly didn't want to take me, I wouldn't force her. I shuddered against the freezing wind whipping through the lower town, and pulled my cloak tighter around my shoulders. The heavy snow had finally disappeared, but the cold of the mountain never seemed to fade. The castle had been fairly easy to slip out of. None of the generals were around, and the servants we did pass didn't seem to care or look up long enough to notice us. "Are you sure the king isn't going to come after us?" May asked over the howling wind as we trudged along the rather empty marketplace. "No, I wasn't. Yeah, I'm sure." I cowled and kept the slight disdain from my voice. I had left a small note for North outside of his door, one saying the only thing I knew that would ensure he wouldn't come after us. I couldn't forgive him for the elders' deaths. At least, not yet. I needed space from him, needed enough time to sort out all my thoughts and erratic emotions. And May was staying with me for that time. I knew he would respect those wishes, for a little while at least. He had seemed genuinely upset the night before, as if he truly cared how I felt about him. His mood swings confused me more than the situation with May and the secret cave. He would give me my space, or at least he would think he was, for a little while. I didn't want to lie to him, but this place, it was something I needed to see, something I needed to know the truth about, and it was the one thing I could figure out on my own. And I had an inkling feeling he would never let me anywhere near it if he had the choice. "I bought us a few days at least. Is the cave very far?" I asked as we walked hurriedly past the many shops and houses of Kingdom's town center, the same one we had spied on at the beginning of all this madness. I highly doubted the note would buy us a few hours, let alone a few days, but it was strong to hope. Even if Eric did leave me alone, 𝐿𝐢𝐴 would not. Not terribly. Maybe a half day from the village, which means it was probably a day and a half to 2 days from the kingdom. I hoped we could make it there and back before anyone noticed we were gone, but that was a foolish hope. I knew it was. 𝐿𝐢𝐴 would be checking on me sooner rather than later, if he hadn't already. We had to start traveling before that happened. Our footsteps left trails in the light snow covering the ground, but I hoped our dragon cakes were enough to wipe them away as we headed towards the entrance of the kingdom. The last thing we needed was an easy path for them to follow. The morning sun was hidden behind a mass of gray clouds, and offered little light as we finally passed out of the town and walked slowly into the dark woods on the mountain. I felt an odd chill race down my spine and into my stomach. This was the first time I had been away from the king, and at least one of the generals, in months. I wasn't sure if the turning feeling in my stomach was of excitement or trepidation. "Immerse?" May asked softly, her small form pausing just inside the tree line. "Are you all right?" I hadn't realized I had paused just outside of the town's entrance until she turned to look back at me, a good couple of feet separating us. I gripped tightly onto the end of my dark tunic, the same one Tirith had given me on the ship what seemed like ages ago. As my other pressed against that odd feeling in my stomach, I glanced back at the dark, towering castle. "Why, yes." I heard myself stutter as I took a staggering step towards her. "Yes, I'm fine." But I didn't feel fine, and with each step I took into the dense forest, my stomach twisted further in knots. "We don't have to do this if you don't want to." May spoke after a few silent moments passed between us. I quickly shook my head and tried to push down that uneasy feeling as best as I could. "No, I want to do this. I need to do this. I have to know." I murmured the last part softly and ran a shaky hand through my wavy hair before pulling the cloak's thick hood over my head. She cast me a worried glance before pulling her own hood over her head and falling easily into step beside me. "Are you mad at him? The king? I mean," she asked after we had been walking in a calming silence for some time. I glanced over at her before slowly easing over a large rock in our path. "Do not know how I feel," which was the story of my life lately, and it drove me mad. I wish, just once, that something about North made sense. Silence fell over us once again, even though I could practically see her mind turning over and over beneath her dark hood. A lot of things the elders had done never made sense until recently, she finally muttered as the path in front of us started to slowly even out. "Like what?" "They would. She paused and licked her pale lips briefly before glancing out at the snow-covered ground before us. They would ask Lay and I about you a lot, especially when we were young. Or at least, I thought they would. I could feel a frown tug on my lips at her words. And it didn't help that those knots in my stomach continued to grow worse the more distance we put between us and the castle. Do you really believe they placed those thoughts into your head? Placed memories of us growing up together, of the life we all shared? Her nod was sad, and the slow bob of it matched the dull beat of my heart. They even put them asking those questions into our minds, like they needed to make sure we knew you. I am sorry. Immerse. I do not know if I believe any of this. I muttered against the chilly air, even though the heaviness in my chest told me differently. I was never supposed to find out. Neither was Lay. But they were so furious when they discovered that the king had taken you back to his castle. Even Elder Lana took part in the inquiries. That news was like a heavy blow to my stomach. Besides May and her brother, Elder Lana was the only other person who I had ever truly felt close to. Even after all the testing and experiments they had done to decipher the gold power. It was just another piece of information to make my head spin. They had twisted and played with our minds ever since you awoke. Trained us to keep you hidden. They even masked the rest of the villagers' memories. My head was starting to throb painfully behind my eyes, and I paused long enough to press my fists against them and let out a long, stress-filled sigh. Why would they do all of this? May, what could they possibly have gotten out of it? My voice was as shaky as my breathing as I pressed my fingertips into my temples. The gold power. If they wanted it that badly, I would have found a way to have given it to them. I flinched when her gently hand suddenly rested on my shoulder, and my eyes snapped open to lock on the bright hazel of hers. The looks crossing over her almost gentle face was sad and filled with sympathy. It was never you they wanted. Immerse. My heart immediately jumped at her words, and at the quiet remorse that washed over her soft features. I knew what she was going to say before she ever did, and it made some protective instinct in me want to surface. It was always 𝐊𝐤𝐼𝐬. Chapter 29. I wasn't sure if it was because Turf had made such a big deal about keeping their history and myths a secret, or that Eric held on so tightly to the belief of their god. But just hearing 𝐊𝐤𝐼𝐬's name slip from her lips made the hairs on my arms stand, and caused my eyes to narrow defensively. I knew little of the wolf, born myths and legends while living at the bottom of the mountain, and I had thought she didn't either, but I'm sure I was wrong about that like everything else. What do you know of 𝐊𝐤𝐼𝐬? I was surprised at the threatening tone and voice, and at how my brow did in a scowl, but she didn't seem to mind at all. That he is the wolf-born's god, and he fell looking for you. I couldn't stop my head from shaking, or from taking a few uneasy steps away from her. Gods, this was too much to take in one sitting. I was finally getting answers, even if they seemed completely insane. But it was something. 𝐊𝐤𝐼𝐬 exist. Their story is just a myth. It's not, and you know it. I showed you the craters. Immerse. I showed you the coffin you were hidden in. I'm taking you to that very cave. The sooner you accept the truth, the easier it will be. I didn't bother answering her, and instead turned my face towards the cool wind blowing across the mountain and started walking down the path again. You wanted answers. You can run away when you realize they were expecting. She grumbled behind me, but didn't try to touch me again as she hurried to catch up. It's just so much to try and believe. I sighed loudly and slowed down enough for her to fall easily in step beside me. My memories seemed so real. May and what you're saying just. Docent. I know. I'm sure I wouldn't believe it either if I were you. I tried to let my mind stay as open as possible, to try and accept the possibility that maybe, just maybe, everything she was saying was true. They were trying to use me to find him. I muttered under the dark recesses of my cloak as I watched our feet step over the pristine white of the snow. I saw her nod out of the corner of my eye. Yes, discovering you were mated to the king threw a wrench in their plans, until they discovered the part of the god's soul residing in him. My breath caught in my throat words. At her words, and my eye snapped over to her as she eased over a fallen branch. "How do you know about that?" My voice was a shocked hiss as it passed my cold lips, but she simply shrugged and pulled her cloak further around her. "The same way they saw that you were the star. They were good at seeing unearthly beings like that. The elders. How manipulative they were. Perhaps it was a good thing Eric had ended them. If what they said were true, then they had caused more harm and turmoil than any way I had ever known, including North. But they were not the only ones who thought the god existed, and was still roaming the mountain. The seer, 𝐊𝐢𝐳, had mentioned something about it also, about using me to draw 𝐊𝐳 out, to take his power. If the god truly did exist, I feared for him, but the elders were gone now. North had taken care of them, and I hadn't seen the seer in quite some time. That was one less threat to me, or 𝐊𝐳. Well, look at me, talking as if I were actually starting to believe all this. What did they do to you, Immerse? I asked softly a moment later, even though a shiver ran through me at the question. I haven't seen 𝐊𝐼𝐳 in a while. I'm not sure what happened to him. Her voice had darkened, along with my heart, and I felt that familiar frown pull at my lips. Even if my entire childhood with the siblings hadn't been real, that didn't stop the love I felt for them both. Unless that was put into my head as well. They didn't beat me or anything, but they loved fear tactics. Like the fear of whether or not they would feed me that day. That's horrible. I'm so sorry. She shrugged beneath her hood, like it wasn't a big deal before stopping and bending down to the snow. It's not your fault. I don't blame you for any of this. It's not like you knew what was going on, or could control it. She murmured softly as she drew little swirls along the soft snow. I sat carefully down on a frozen log beside her and blinked up at the gray sky. The sun was hidden behind a blanket of dark clouds once again. You should not be so upset with the king over this. I'm quite glad he rid the world of them. Honestly, I was starting to be as well. I never knew those hardships she spoke of, or remembered them at least. But I could not deny what was right in front of me. She had looked horrible in the town, starved and sunken into her own skin. Who could deny what she claimed? And the king. He never actually spoke about it. But I knew Eric believed in the tales he told me. Believed in that little book he had given me. Believed in his god. I found that rather endearing, even if it sometimes seemed far-fetched. And if he believed in the coffin, and me sleeping for hundreds of years beneath the mountain, I knew he would have killed whoever he thought was responsible for it. I shouldn't have let that surprise me, like he had said. That much I did know. But the way he had acted, the way his eyes held such a murderous gleam and his jaw set in sheer anger directed at me, was upsetting. He had been the king I once feared, and nowhere near the mate I desperately wanted him to be. I had a right to be upset with him, at least in regard to me. No matter how selfish that sounded. We were quiet for a while after that, both of our minds lost in their own thoughts. The further down the mountain we traveled, the steeper the path seemed to become. I wasn't sure how long we had been walking before the snow finally began to thin away, and the sun escaped its dark prison behind the clouds. But it was already only a quarter away from the horizon. We should probably find somewhere to camp for the night, before it gets too cold to travel. We paused just on the edge of a thick tree line, a small clearing just ahead. I frowned and pushed my hood back enough to run my hand through my thick, dark hair. Do we have much farther to go? Probably another half day. We have to pass around the village to reach the cliffs. My eyes widened at that, and my gaze snapped to hers as my heart jumped in my chest. The cliffs. You never said anything about the cliffs. There was probably only one actual cliff in that region of the mountain, but what lay beneath was treacherous. Sharp, rocky, points of death littered the bottom of the cliff, with pools of water far deeper than most could swim. Those who tried to navigate its terrain hardly ever survive. Even I stayed away from the cliffs when I still lived in the village, and got into all kinds of trouble and mishaps. It makes sense though, doesn't it? she muttered quietly as she started scouring the small clearing for branches dry enough to start a fire. No one ever goes there. It's the perfect spot to hide something. Or someone. I grumbled mostly to myself before bending down to help look for twigs. She didn't say anything else after that, and we fell into a comfortable silence as we set down the small packs we had brought with us. It wasn't long before she had a small fire going, and the thin snow surrounding us melted away. I passed out a few pieces of bread and cheese that I had managed to ask a servant for before we left. We had enough for 2 more days at least. Enough to reach the cave and travel back to the kingdom. If Eric hadn't found us by then. I had no doubt in my mind that 𝐿𝐲𝐻 had come to check on me, and found us gone. He would have definitely told North by now, and I wouldn't be surprised if they were already scouring the castle and kingdom for us. How long did we have before they started rampaging down the mountain? Dear God, he was going to be furious. My head angled towards the path we had traveled, towards the kingdom hidden behind 1,000 trees and clouds at the top of the mountain. It was the closest thing I had to home now that the village was apparently just a fake memory. I couldn't go back even if I wanted to. I wouldn't. That place was not mine. What is he like? May spoke up some time later when the sun had officially fallen behind the mountain and that familiar chill settled into the night air. Hopefully the fire would be enough to warm us through the night. The king. Is he like all the stories they would whisper about him in the village and lower kingdom? Is he as ruthless as everyone claims? I brought my legs up to my chest at her questions, my cloak wrapping around my small body comfortably as I placed my cheek on top of my knee. I do not honestly know. The truth of that one statement tore at my heart. I truly didn't know North. Not as much as I should have. He kept everything so hidden, so tucked down tight in his chest. He hardly ever let me see what he was thinking, or feeling. Half the time I doubted even he knew. I think, around me. He tries very hard to be as carefully gentle as he can. Like 𝐻𝐸s afraid I will break at the littlest thing. At least, that's what he has told me before, that he tries so hard to hide that monster inside him. But sometimes he slips up, and I see the king that the stories are made from. Images flashed through my mind. Images of him forcibly taking over 𝐿𝐲𝐻's mind, of killing the elders, of his whole beautiful body covered in blood. I do not believe the tales are all true, but I wouldn't be surprised if a few were. He was so gentle with me most of the time, and often even sweet. I wish he wouldn't try to hide any parts of him. If he was genuinely true with himself around me, I would grow to understand him and his decisions more. But he would not. On one hand, I find his need to keep himself as gentle as possible in my mind's eye endearing. But on another, it drives me mad. Do you love him? My head lifted enough for my eyes to dart to her pretty pale face a question. But her gaze was distant as she watched the fire. I felt my stomach churn uneasily in my chest. It felt so easy talking to her like this, like it did for all those years that she desperately wanted me to believe weren't real. I want to. Everything in me tells me that I do. But in all actuality, I don't know. Like everything else in my life right now. I muttered that last bit darkly before burying my face back into my knees. He loves you, or cares deeply for you at least. I couldn't help the ecstatic surge that swelled in my chest at her words, but I tried to shush it down as she continued talking. When I saw him appear behind you in the market the other day, I was surprised at the sheer relief on his face, then terrified when he hard turned those creepy eyes on me. His eyes aren't creepy. They're beautiful, but I didn't bother saying the second part. It was implied. Do you think he will let me stay there? At the castle. I don't have anywhere else to go now, she murmured softly a moment later, worry and slight hope printing in her voice. My shoulders tensed, and I tried not to let out a heavy sigh. I'm not sure, but I will ask him when we return. If he was mad enough to lock me in the dungeon and never let me out again. But you are an underling, and he, nor his kind, likes the shifters at the body of the mountain very much. I would beg him, though, if I had to, despite our rather shady history. and relationship altogether. She was still the closest friend I had. I would not let anything bad happen to her if I could help it. I know, 𝐿𝐸𝐵𝐿, but will you still try? Of course. The fire crackled between us, its flame dancing just barely above our heads. I leaned closer to its warmth as she threw on another few branches. We should get some rest, she murmured sometime later as she readjusted her pack on the ground and used it as a pillow, her cloak spilling around her like a large blanket. We should reach the cliffs by midday tomorrow, but we need to have enough daylight to navigate its peaks. A shiver of fear ran down my spine at the mention of the cliffs, but I nodded my head in agreement and curled up against my own pack. I wanted to do this. I needed to do this. I knew I did amp. The sound of long, dark, purposeful howls filled the cold night air and drew me from the sleep that had taken hours to fall into. I blinked in a daze up at the dark sky as May jerked awake across from me, her dark eyes wide. Is that what I think it is? There was no hiding the fear in her gaze, or the slight tremor in her voice.
It matched my own.
I don't want to stay and find out. I rose quickly to my feet and piled snow onto the few glowing ashes that was once our fire. Another howl sounded down the mountain, and the deep, dark cry of it tore at my heart. I knew, without a doubt, who it belonged to, and I no longer questioned the temperament the king would be in if he caught us. Deadly furious. We have to hurry, or he will find us before the sun has a chance to rise. There was a panic in my voice I was not familiar with, and for the first time since I met North, I feared for my physical safety, which was ridiculous. He wouldn't hurt me. I knew he wouldn't. If our mate status wasn't enough, his people's views on how to treat their women would keep me safe. Why was I wasting time thinking about this? I slung my pack over my shoulder, just as May had with hers, and we took off at a brisk pace down the path once again. We had a full day's head start, but to feet were no match for the speed and power of the wolf, Born's paws. Even May in her shifter form would have a hard time outrunning them, and her cat was too small to carry a fully grown human. The snow should hide our scent well enough. I panted as we practically ran down the path. But he will head to the village first. We're going to have to bypass it to reach the cliffs. Agreed. She shouted over the wind whipping around us as we raced down the snow-covered path. I think we should get off the trail and take the western route. I barely had time to nod my head in agreement before she abruptly changed directions and took off between the thick trees and branches of the forest. I followed quickly behind her, but she had the agile, mess-and stealth of her shifter. I did not. I began to lose count of how many branches snagged on my cloak, or cut into my cheeks and hands. But I refused to let those sharp stabs of pain slow me down as I followed after May. That time, months before when we first fled from north down the mountain, flashed through my mind, and I cowed and helped the laugh that shot from my lips. History truly does repeat itself. I was sure how long we were running before my body finally had enough, and I slowed to a staggering, painful stop between a thick clump of trees. I bent over at the waist, my hands on my knees as I drew in deep, ragged breaths. May stopped running a few yards ahead of me when she noticed I was no longer there, and jogged quickly back. I wanted to scowl at the easiness of her breathing, and the lack of sweat on her brow, but I was way too exhausted to do so. What a life, what a life. To be a shifter. We don't have the time to rest. Immerse. We need to keep going. I just need a moment. I gasped and wiped at the hair sticking to my wet cheek. She let out a gruff sound at the back of her throat, reaching into her pack and pulling out her water bag. Here, have a quick drink and then let us go again. I took the water gratefully and gave it back to her before slowly standing. I need a while longer before I can run again, but we do need to keep moving. I started walking in the direction we had been running before, with her just a few feet ahead of me. The sun was finally starting to rise in the sky, and the desperate howls of North, and I'm sure the generals, had all but disappeared. Only the remnant of the way that they tugged at my heart remained. But that didn't mean the wolves weren't there. We passed quickly over large boulders, and rivers, over fallen trees and under thick bushes. Hours upon hours of hurried walking with little breaks. The sun was probably 2 hours away from reaching the middle of the sky when we paused just a short league or so away from the cliffs. "I'm starving," I muttered after drinking a few short sips from my water bag. "Eat here while you can. I don't want to stay in the cave too long. That place gives me the creeps. This whole thing gives me the creeps." I grumbled around the piece of bread I shoved unceremoniously into my mouth. Her dark eyes gave me a sympathetic glance. "If it helps you learn your past, it must be worth it." I nodded before washing the bread down with another sip of water, and rolling up my pack once again. "It is, but I agree. I would like to get this over with as soon as possible." Not that I was really in a hurry to get back anymore. Eric knew I was gone, and I dreaded our next meeting. He was going to be furious with me. Chapter 31 glance over the side of the cliffs had my stomach churning anxiously. "That is terrifying," I muttered more to myself than May, but she nodded in agreement anyway. The sharp, pointed rocks that seemed to rest thousands of feet below gleamed as proud as bloody daggers up ass. I gulped. Yes, but the elders were cowards. And frail. They built a passage long ago that leads easily down the cliff and into the cave. I embraced the meager relief her words gave me, if only because I knew that would be the only comfort I would feel for a while. I followed her carefully around the edge of the cliff, my steps a good 3 or 4 feet away from its drop. My stomach seemed to flutter at its height. Maybe this was such a good idea. It was long before she had climbed carefully over a large boulder just at the edge of the cliff, and eased herself down the other side. She made the action look so smooth and effortless, like stepping over a pebble. I frowned but climbed reluctantly after her, though it took twice as long. This didn't seem safe at all. But sure enough, there appeared to be stairs chiseled down the edge of the precipice that led down to its treacherous depths. I paused on the top step, my fingers clenching tightly into the edge of my cloak. This was really happening. I was really going to risk the bottom of the cliffs for some cave I had supposedly been stuck in once. My breath caught in my throat, and my eyes grew wide as I scanned the large expanse of bottom of the cliff. For hundreds of years, I had been trapped here, in this ridiculously cold, dark, deadly place, alone. Maybe I didn't want to know about my past. Maybe I didn't want to remember. I knew the tale of 𝐊𝐿𝐻 and his star, knew the heartbreak and turmoil they had both experienced. If that story was real, if I truly was the star, did I really want to remember all that pain? I staggered backward uneasily. Immerse, May called a few steps down the cliff, her dark eyes curious as she glanced over her shoulder. "Are you okay?" Was I okay? Not really. I was relatively numb in my ignorance. Or at least, I thought I was. I could be content like that for a while more, just believing that I grew up with May and 𝐊𝐻𝐬, that the king and I were mates and he kept secrets to keep me safe. Believe that one day he would confess he loved me and we would have an actual life together. I could be happy with that. But if none of it were real, if everything I knew was fake, there would be no point in believing a happy ending. My life would forever be a lie. "I'm okay," I heard myself answer before I lifted my cloak enough to not trip over. I followed her down the small stone steps slowly, my eyes adjusting to the thick fog rolling through the air the further down we traveled. A chill ran down my spine and caused the hairs on my arms to stand on end. This place was beyond eerie. It took us both a good half-hour to climb down the steep steps, our fingers dragging along the rocky surface of the cliff to keep our balance. It was insane believing anyone traveled to this desolate piece of land on purpose, and it was little relief when we finally reached the bottom. The floor was littered with small pebbles and sharp, jagged rocks that were hard to maneuver through. The fog that coated the expanse of the earthy floor only made matters worse. "This way," she called softly over her shoulder, her voice as shaky as I felt. "I've only been down here once before," she whispered softly, as if the fog would grow angry if she spoke any louder. It actually might. I doubted either one of us knew what truly lurked inside the thick gray cloud. The elders took 𝐊𝐢 and I hear the day they woke you. I didn't remember before, until they started the interrogations. But I had been terrified. I can imagine. I murmured just as softly as she pulled us both to a stop beside a small, dark opening against the side of the cliff. It was rather tiny, barely as tall as either us, and only wide enough for one body to enter at a time. But it was dark, far darker than anywhere I had seen before. It made I settle in my veins. This was not a place for the light. She gave me a sad smile before bending down and lifting a discarded torch into the air. I didn't understand why they would take us to some girl's grave at the bottom of the cliffs, or why anyone would bury someone down here. I watched as she used the small fire starter stone to light the torch before putting it back in her pack. But then I saw them chanting over you, twisting your thoughts and feelings into a life that had never existed. She walked carefully into the small opening of the cave, her head ducking so she wouldn't hit its ceiling. I gulped, and clasped my arms securely over my chest before I followed her. My breath felt like ice as it entered my lungs. Then the turn to us. She continued as the light of the torch lit our way, and did the same. We both woke in our beds the next day, with you in yours, as a family, just as they had wanted. The further we walked, the larger the cave became. We no longer had to crouch, and the damp walls on either side stretched away as the light from the torch covered a larger area. I haven't been awake very long, have I? The most insane part of all of this was that I was slowly starting to believe it and trust in the anxious fear selling my gut. This cave did not hold warm intent. Know how long, May. The panic that filled my stomach was unexpected, and so was the fear that slowly clogged my throat. Panic and fear of what, though? The fact that my life really was real, or that I had just begun to start walking the world. That I truly was a star. His star. She didn't answer for a few silent seconds, and the flickering snaps from the torch was the only sound that greeted our ears before she finally let out a small sigh. A week before we traveled up the mountain, and you met the king. The ringing in my ears was automatic, and it felt as if I could never take a breath no matter how hard I tried. A week before I had met the king, before all of this had happened. That week was the one I heard the whispered rumors of him from those traveling from the lower kingdom. The unbelievable need I had to see him at least once, to know his face. It had only been a week. Then a thought struck me, one that made my insides twist painfully. Perhaps we truly weren't mates. If I was this star, one that yearned for 𝐴𝐸𝐸, maybe the part of Eric's soul that belonged to the god is what tied us together, nothing else. That one thought caused an aching lurch in my chest. If we weren't mates, if there was nothing but that part of his soul that made me important, how long would it be until he realized that? Until I didn't matter to him at all. Yes, which is what the elders found surprising also. Literally a week on this mortal plane, and you had already found a part of 𝐴𝐸𝐸. How much longer would it be until you found the actual God himself? My heart seemed to ache, and my head throbbed at the new information. Everything between Eric and I, all that I had held on to for these long months, hadn't been real, not really. My bond with him was as superficial as the life I thought I once lived. I wanted to cry, to just drop to the floor where I stood and cry into my knees. But I would not. No matter how tempting that sounded. I would not let sorrow slow me now. Not when I was so close to the truth. And if everything May said was real, then I would deal with its consequences. Even if that meant Eric truly wouldn't accept me anymore. It isn't much farther now. I followed obediently behind her, my head bowed to the floor as I watched our shadows dance along the wall. What a week this has been. The air grew colder and damper the further we walked, until the walls gave way to a small room with water gleaming off the rocky floor. Another shiver ran down my spine as a hard feeling suddenly weighed down my stomach. This is it, May whispered in front of me, her cloaked figure blocking my view. I stayed stock still as she stepped to the side to light another torch hanging against the wall, then placed the one she carried in a barren holster. My breath caught in my throat at the sight before me. It was the coffin, the very same one she had shown me in my mind. the one where I had been cast asleep for generations upon generations. The sight of it shot through my mind like a lightning bolt, and sent a wave of I'm not sure what, but it shook through my entire body, and it wasn't pleasant. The coffin was real. My body moved towards it on its own accord. My eyes locked on the intricate glass lid. It's at atop a stone table, one raised on smooth, rocky steps. The wall behind the coffin was solid and strong, and acted as the perfect prison. My hand reached up, and my fingers traced the edges of the glass carefully. I gasped as a jolt shot up my arm. "I told you it was real," May murmured softly behind me, her tone sympathetic as I traced the edge of the lid. She was right. Even if she, or someone else, had planted the coffin here, the reaction I had to it had no compare. Curiosity, awe, and fear. I drew my hand back, ready to be rid of the glass jail. Cell image. What a flash of red caught my eye. My breath caught. "May," I muttered in the dark damps of the cave. "Help me get this lid open." She was hesitant at first, her dark eyes uncertain, but she nodded anyway and walked slowly towards me. We were able to push the glass lid up easily enough, but the object laying inside of it caused my throat to clog. It was a large, ruby red precious stone. A cord ran through a thin hole in its top, and it shined in the dim light of the torches from its hidden spot in the corner of the coffin, completely forgotten by the girl who once wore it. May watched with wide eyes as I leaned over the cold edge and reached for the beautiful stone. My eyes locked on its deep, dark color. "It's beautiful," I murmured just as my fingers curled around its smooth edges. Heat immediately surged into my palm and up my arm as the stone pulsed in my hand. "What in the world?" I murmured as I eased away from the coffin once again. The stone and its cord clutched firmly in my hand. "What is it?" May asked at my side, her dark hazel eyes peeking over my shoulder to look down at the stone. I ignored her and pulled my hand close to my chest before uncurling my fingers around the ruby. My heart jumped in my chest. The red from before seemed to practically glow, and the heat coming from the beautiful stone slowly crept up my arm. "Min and me." The words slipped from my lips on their own, as if they were a long, lost whisper of a name I once held dear to my heart. The brilliant object pulsed in my hand, its color surging out across the entire room until all I saw was red, then black. "Aunt, what are you doing?" "Glowing." Red eyes flashed to mine, and their owner's lips pulled into a sneaky smile as he drew his hand slowly away from the sky. "Making you a present." I frowned, but didn't approach him as his dark hair fell slowly over his forehead, and his eyes flashed in amusement. "You know how I feel about gifts." "Yes, that you can never have too many." I snickered past his lips and I cowled and helped my laugh from bubbling across my tongue as I stepped slowly towards him. "You give me too much already. I do not need anything else." He ignored my words, and the exasperated look I shot him, as he reached for my hand with the one he did not hide behind him. "You shall need nor want for anything. That is what we agreed upon," he murmured softly as he raised the back of my hand to his waiting lips. "And I do not need nor want for anything. I am perfectly happy, and happier yet. I plan to make you." Before I could argue further, he pulled my hand away from his lips and turned it palm upwards. His dark eyes flashed against the fading light of the sun, and I watched suspiciously as he placed a solid, warm rock-like object in my hand. "Oh, 𝐿𝐴. It's beautiful," I murmured in a daze as his hand fell away to reveal a stone as red as his eyes, and half the size of my palm. "A piece of my heart," he muttered softly and leaned down to press a kiss against the stone in my palm. "To hold with you always." He rose to his full, intimidating height once again, his strong fingers warm as they poured and twined through the top of the stone into the air. "Wear this always. Wherever you go, ever you go. And I will be there." He stepped smoothly behind me, his free hand soft as it brushed my hair over my shoulder, the red of his eyes slowly fading away. My stomach filled with a pleasing warmth as he drew the cord over my head until the stone rested against my chest, the ruby color of it pulsing with heat. "You mean to track me? You sly devil," but there was no malice in my voice. Only laughter as he bent over my shoulder to press a kiss against my neck. "You know me too well." He chuckled into my ear as he eased his strong arms around the curve of my waist. "But you must keep it close to your heart." His voice grew serious then, that always present chuckle sliding away as his lips brushed against my ear. "Otherwise it will not work. And if I do not wish for you to know where I am." I teased lightly and gripped onto the thick arm around me as his face buried into the crook of my shoulder. "I will always find you, my beautiful Immerse. Immerse. Don't step there." May's voice suddenly drilled into my skull and pulled me out of the vision I had so easily fallen into. But her warning had come too late, and I stepped onto the large stone beside the steps of coffin. The response was automatic, and as the solid steel bars slammed heavily over the only entrance in and out of the room, dread filled my stomach. May let out a strangled cry. "What have you done?" That was the only way out. She raced over to the bars, her breathing frantic as she pulled viciously against them. I stood frozen in my spot, my precious stone clutched to my chest. I didn't know what to say. How could I say anything to make that situation better? And my mind was still reeling from the vision the little stone had given me. A vision I knew must have been real once. The truth of it was something I had never felt before, and it made that feeble life the elders had built for me seem like falling dominoes. I could feel the lie of them, could see its flaws and holes in my mind. I knew little of my life despite my little stone, but at least I knew the truth of the reality. It was all fake. Immerse. May's voice was a shrill shriek in my ears as I lifted the cord over my head and placed the stone beneath my tunic, right against my heart. "What are we going to do?" She cried and fell back against the bars until her butt hit the dirt floor with a thud. The stone pulsed against my chest. "Let's not panic," I murmured softly as I sat down across from her and pulled my pack around. I wasn't sure if it was the thrill of finding the stone, or the warm calm it seemed to send through my body. But I did not fear being trapped here for long. May simply scoffed and rolled her eyes. But I, once again, ignored her as I reached for my water bag. "It will take days for the king to find us down here. That's if he decided to check the cliffs at all." I let her rant and sipped at the water slowly before tucking it all away in my bag. The warmth from the stone like a warm caress. "We don't have enough food to last us long, and the water is already running out." And she paused, and her hazel eyes grew wide as her gaze flickered behind me. "Immerse," she stammered as I traced the cord slowly around my neck. "What?" I asked as my eyes snapped up to hers, but her hand only gestured behind me. I turned my torso enough to glance at the coffin, only to come face to face with a dark pair of eyes. Eyes so red they outshone any ruby or fire that ever existed. Eyes as red as the stone resting against my chest. Not for the first time that day. My breathing failed me, but that did not stop my eyes from studying his intense gaze. The red orbs blinked and revealed nothing but the cave wall behind them. But then the air seemed to shift, and a dark shadow suddenly outlined the being those eyes belonged to. A being so large it even trumped that of the king's wolf. My heart hammered in my chest, and I could hear it beating in my ears. But I did not cower away from the apparition as May was. It wouldn't hurt me. Those eyes blinked again, and then the wolf's shadowy head tilted towards mine. I held my breath as the tip of its nose brushed along the top of my head, even though it felt only like a soft wisp of air. The wolf pulled back, its large shape appearing solid enough in the candlelight that I could just barely make out the black of its fur. 𝐊𝐢𝐧𝐰. The name slipped softly from my lips and pulled at my chest, a name I had not spoken in hundreds of years. His red eyes narrowed, and a dark snarl lifted the corners of his lips until a flash of bright white fangs reached my vision. He growled and pulled away, his shadow form disappearing until all that was left were those eyes. With a blink, they were gone. The stone pulsated against my chest as my heart clenched. He was gone.